and with 7 members present, to take quorum to conduct today's committee meeting. Present with us in today's meeting are Representatives Patrick Nicholas of Tinian, Representative Danita Yanktamai, Chair of Commerce and Tourism and Cannabis. I'm Donald Magnolia, Chair for Ways and Means. To my left, Vice Chair Representative Karina Magofnia, Representative Richard Lizama, Chair for PUTC, Representative Selena Babauta, Chair for JGO, excuse me, Representative Edwin Probst, Chair for Gaming, Representative Christina Sablan, Chair for Health and Welfare, Representative Leila Staffler, Chair for Education, and our floor leader, Representative Ralph Yumo. Assisting the committee, we have our senior LA, Claire Sablan, our fiscal analyst, Thomas Robago, our legal counsel, Joseph Tyrone, Sergeant at Arms, Mr. Will, and IT, Jonathan. Members, we have 4 items under new business in today's agenda. Just to go through these items, we'll start off with House Bill 2297, followed by House Bill 22105, followed by item D, and then we'll end with item A, which is the Appropriations Act. Depending on where we are, where we'll be at the end of today, we'll determine whether we'll recess and continue on tomorrow and Friday in hopes that we get a complete bill by the end of the week. But I'll discuss more on that when we get to that item. And so with that, I would like to open the floor up for public comments. If there's anyone from the audience. There's none. And so we now move on to the next item on the agenda, adoption of the agenda. Can I get a motion? All right, a motion was made and seconded. All in favor, say aye. All opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We are now under item 4, new business. And we have in front of us House Bill 22-97 to require legislative appropriations for all non-locally sourced funds allocated for the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands and for other purposes. Comments have been sent to the Office of Grants Management, and we did get comments from the administrator, Mr. Epi Cabrera. We sent out requests for comments to the Secretary of Finance. He provided his comments, and the Attorney General, but we have not heard back from his office. And so with that, I now open the floor for discussion. But before we do, right before the meeting, a member had asked what does on the Secretary of Finance comments, what does Article 2, Section 9 of our Constitution have to do with this bill? Article 2, Section 9 is the vacancy within the legislature. And so, Council, if you can clarify. While Council pulls that up, House Bill 22-97 was introduced by the Vice Chair, and for the most part, it's to require all, basically, or for the most part, federal funds be appropriated by the legislature with the exemption of any funds that are received by PSS, OPA, NMC, and all CNMI autonomous entities. I know that OGM, one of their concerns is that, or one of the recommendation was to establish a new department to handle all federal funds. And so before we address any of the other concerns, Council?
Chairman, if you just wanted me to confirm your statement that the cited provision, Article 2, Section 9 of the CNMI Constitution refers to vacancies. Based on my quick review, you were correct. We consulted the CNMI Law Revision Commission website, and there the CNMI Constitution is set forth, and Article 2, Section 9 is indeed vacancy. And I cannot see the relevance of this particular provision to the argument that was set forth in the Secretary's letter. I would presume it's a typographical error, and they meant to refer to some other constitutional provision or some other authority.
Thank you, Council. Before we proceed, I'd like to recognize the presence of a member, Representative Joel Camacho. All right, thank you, Council. The floor is open for discussions. I recognize Representative Christina Sabah.
I just had some brief comments, I guess. In general, I found it really difficult to read the Secretary of Finance's comments on actually both bills on the agenda. I'm not sure who is drafting these letters, but they're really difficult to follow, and I'd be curious to know if like to what degree these letters are being reviewed even by legal counsel before they are submitted to the legislature, commenting on legislation. I don't find, like in the case of this legislation, the comments on House Bill 2297, I have to sort of strain my reading of this letter to try to make some sense and find something constructive that would be helpful for us as we review this bill. But I guess at this time, I wanted to ask if the main author of the bill, our vice chair, could provide us with some greater context for the legislation and also, maybe address the concerns that were raised by both finance and I think the Office of Grants Management, right? So I think that would be helpful for our deliberations today.
That would be what? I'm sorry?
Helpful.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Any other members? Recognize Rep. Staffler.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess I just wanted to say on the record that the CNMI is one of the few places across the U.S. that does not have some kind of input into how the federally non-locally sourced funds are allocated. And so I think that we should continue to pursue this avenue, as it is one that most other states and legislatures have taken, despite the comments that were given by the Secretary of Finance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Staffler. Any other members? Just looking at the grants administrator's comments, it seems like a lot of it has to do with the time constraints in getting a joint resolution passed or adopted, as well as the amount of work it would take for the legislature to review grants and get it approved. He did go on to say that 34 states has that authority, have legislative authority over ARPA funds, while 16 other states do not. These are funds directly provided from U.S. Treasury in times of disaster, but this is just particularly ARPA. However, all other grants could be appropriated by the legislature. There are concerns about some of the penalties in regards to being hefty. And so, I think this is a policy call, and it's a there are many ways to circumvent or to assist in trying to get a joint resolution passed in order to approve any grant application or any approval for grants, especially seeing as how it would benefit the CNMI. I think that the legislature would make it a priority to conduct joint sessions or even emergency sessions in order to address any grant opportunities for the CNMI. And so it's just something I want to point out. And so I believe, Rep. Balta, you had something that recognized?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. As to the comments of both the Secretary of Finance and the Grants Office with respect to House Bill 2297, to require the legislative appropriation for all non-locally sourced funds, I'd like to bring or call to the attention Section 701 of the covenant, our covenant with the United States government. And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to read Section 701. It's just one short paragraph.
Proceed.
Section 701 of the covenant to establish the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands states that the government of the United States will assist the government of the Northern Mariana Islands in its efforts to achieve a progressively higher standard of living for its people as part of the American economic community, and to develop economic sources needed to meet financial responsibilities of local self-government. To this end, the United States will provide direct multi-year financial support to the government of the Northern Mariana Islands for local government operations, for capital improvement programs, and for economic development. The initial period of such support will be 7 years as provided in, and it goes on to mention Section 702, which are for capital improvement projects. But the fact that our covenant clearly states that the federal government will provide financial assistance to bring the standard of living for our residents here in the Marianas to a decent level, I think, holds greater weight than the section cited by the irrelevant section cited by the Secretary of Finance. And I think through this language in the covenant, we, and it's subject to the interpretation of our council and this committee, that we can um, appropriate, make accommodations to appropriate funds that are not locally sourced. Certainly, the ARPA funds, the COVID funds that have come in, while they may have specific language as to the use of such funds, I think through Section 701 of our covenant with the United States government, we should take the position that we have the authority to appropriate non-locally sourced funds. And this bill, House Bill 2297, certainly is a complement to that section of the covenant, and is not necessarily a contradiction of the language in Section 701. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Babalta. Any other members? I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you for the second time. I wanted to, I guess, add on to the comments that Rep. Babalta and Rep. Staffler have made so far, and I do support the intent of this legislation, and I recognize, as Rep. Staffler pointed out, and as the Office of Grants Management pointed out, that there are more than 30 states now that already allow for legislative appropriation of these of federal funds, non-locally sourced funds. And I would note that this legislation does apply really only to the office of the governor. And it's the office of the governor that is the recipient, as we know, and the sole kind of expenditure authority at this time anyway, for over, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars at this point. But if you take into account FEMA as well as ARPA, CDB, well, not CDBG, well, yeah, actually the office of the governor is the grantee for that as well. And so I appreciate that there are exceptions for entities such as the public school system, OPA, NMC, other autonomous agencies, where there are where there's more clarity about what the funds can be used for, and they're not so easily reprogrammed by the executive as they are in the case of, for example, ARPA. And I would note too, going back to the Secretary of Finance's comments, there's this claim that to subject non-locally sourced funds to be appropriated by the legislature would jeopardize all future efforts to access alternative funding sources to supplant local revenues. I mean, for one, we really shouldn't, in general, be supplanting local revenues with federal funds. But two, the Secretary of Finance claims that there would be undue delays, and we actually have precedent already with the way that we adopt a joint resolution for the NMHC, the block grant. There's nothing that is overly cumbersome about that process. We've been doing it for many years. It's NMHC provides the resolution. They prepare the plan for the expenditures of these funds, and the legislature gives it its blessing through joint resolution. And that process has been working in that case for many years. And I think that there is a similar process that's proposed in this legislation that could work just as well. I will say that I do think that the criminal penalties that are provided in this bill are quite severe. It is a policy call, but to, propose a felony punishment of up to 20 years of imprisonment is just seems a bit extreme to me. And I think that we should reconsider that and maybe look to other sections of the law, maybe in the Planning and Budgeting Act, for penalties for violations of the act that would be more commensurate with the offense. And finally, before we act on this legislation, I would like to suggest that we consult with OPA about the provision, I guess this is section 105 on page 5, that would require OPA to establish a task force to monitor these expenditures. I don't know if we sought comments from OPA, Mr. Chairman, but I do think that it would be useful to seek their comments in this case, since we would be adding on to their already extensive mandates. And there should probably be more guidance about what that task force should look like. So I'd like to propose that we, before adopting this legislation, that we address those two sections, the penalties as well as the OPA section. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. Recognize Rep. Bawalta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adding on to Representative Sablan's comments with respect to the processing delays that are raised in the comments provided for this bill, that issue is not without resolution. That could be fixed by statute to streamline and consolidate the grants office with the Department of Finance. Certainly, it is not without remedy. So therefore, I don't think the justification provided by the grants office is substantive to delay the passage of this bill. I support the intent of the bill, and I respectfully request that we pass this out of committee. Currently, as it is written, and like I said, if the grants office is concerned about delays of distributing or dispersing the funds, that is an easy fix. And I don't see any reason why the House of Representatives, through this committee, should abdicate its authority to appropriate funds for the CNMI government. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Bawalta. And just in line with that, right, as what Rep. Sablan had mentioned in regards to any funding approval for NMHC, or even such as the ones we had with MPOT, right, with the loan. It's just a matter of us reviewing these grants that come in and approving them, and then just go through the normal process through the grants office, and all these things that the administrator had mentioned in regards to accounts and paperwork, that will still be left to the Office of Grants Management, but at least to allow the legislature to be aware of the grants that are coming in and the funds that are being received, and to ensure that the grants are being reviewed by OPA, as well as just more involvement with the legislature in regards to all funds received into the CNMI. We do have two recommendations right now. We can pass it out of committee, and then if we get any substantive recommendations from OPA, we can amend it on the floor, or we table this while we find language to make any changes to the penalties if members think that we should reduce the penalties. And so I'll open that for discussion with the members.
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe what? Sorry.
Uh, well, just on the issue of the penalties, maybe we could just get some counsel on, what other penalties we can look at that already exist in the law that would be, maybe in the Planning and Budgeting Act or some other part of the code that we could compare this to. I know that some of us like the stiffness of the penalties that are currently in this legislation. But again, like up to 20 years imprisonment for you know violations of this act, and up to 5 years for failing to obtain legislative certification. I mean, there shouldn't be any excuse for violating the act, but again, the punishment should fit the crime. So I would like to look at what else there is in the statutes that we could compare this to.
Okay. Thank you for that, Rep. Sablan. And then also in regards to the OPA, maybe we can even go as far as including language where some of the administrative costs from these grants can be used to help fund OPA. Whether OPA can set up a division within the agency to take care of all non-locally sourced funds using the administrative cost. But my hope, and if members are okay with, is that we can pass this out of committee today, but we'll table this until we come back after we finish with the budget to allow the author and as well as any members time to prepare the amendments to these penalties as well as the OPA concerns. And if there's any additional concerns that the members have, we can address that when we close out this committee meeting. And so if there are no objections from the members, we'll table this until later on. We'll still be within this meeting, but because I can anticipate that we won't end today due to the time we'll need to work on the budget, we'll address this bill when the Budget Appropriations Act is complete. All right, no objections, members? All right, this House Bill 22-97 is hereby tabled until to allow members to prepare any amendments. And so with that, we now move on to House Bill 22-105 to offset FAC or fuel adjustment charge increases with revenue derived from the liquid fuel tax. Members, as the author of this bill, the intention was to use what's collected in liquid fuel tax in the fiscal year to offset any increases that may occur during the fiscal year. Or if there are no increases, then we can further decrease the FAC charges. And so the proposed or the projected revenue collections for the fuel adjustment, or sorry, the liquid fuel tax for next fiscal year is around 2.5 million. And so any increases or all liquid fuel tax collected within the quarter will be deposited into a special account in which CUC will have access to or can request for Department of Finance to transfer any liquid fuel tax to help offset any increases in FAC rates. And again, as I've mentioned earlier, if there are no increases in FAC rates, then whatever is collected within the month or the quarter can also further reduce FAC rates. The committee reached out to Secretary of Finance, CUC, and the Attorney General's office. We heard back from the Secretary of Finance as well as Mr. Greg Cruz, the CFO of CUC. He provided some questions, but I think most of them seem like it's just clarification as to what the intent is. And so this bill is just for the fiscal year, and it's not something that will be permanent. It's just to assist in reducing FAC charges during this time. As we know, based on the budget, government operations were not funded for the next fiscal year, but we are trying to take care of employee salaries. But even so, the FAC charges, fortunately, we've seen decreases in the fuel prices at the pump, and we've did receive one notice where the FAC charge, the rate was decreased. But this 2.5 million that we're projecting to collect for the next fiscal year could further reduce that FAC charge. And so at this time, I would like to open the floor up for a discussion with the members. Recognize Rep. Probst.
Thank you, Chairman and colleagues. I understand the comments from the Secretary of Finance, and his role is clear. He talks about the meager revenues and his need to protect whatever financial resources come in. But at the same time, we also have to recognize the fact that we have $500 million in ARPA funding that has been used to help out our people, but not in the sense that it's enough to help our people. I know we've been gifted for our CUC ratepayers for the next couple of months, right before the election, for $300 a month. People that are getting a bill of $1,000 and more, which is quite common nowadays, is $300 enough, and only for the next 2 months? That's the question. That's why I do support this bill, and I do understand the Secretary's position, but the alternative is for the governor to give more than what is currently being given. I just feel, after reaching out to our constituents, actually after seeing my own bill, after all the cuts we made, and how still it is so high, and despite 72 days in a row of drops in the cost of oil, we see only a very little drop from CUC, and at the rate we're paying, we are seeing our constituents being disconnected, and not much mercy when they can't pay it. So what's the alternative? Perhaps the governor can give more. Just my thoughts on this. I do support this bill, and I do hope it passes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rep. Probst. Also, one thing I wanted to point out after reviewing the comment from Secretary of Finance, if you look on page 1 of his comment, the last paragraph, second sentence, I just want to address something that he mentioned. Further, I am weary of this proposal as it does not specify a sunset provision for prudent fiscal planning purposes. But on page 4 of the bill, Section 3, it says sunset. This provision shall expire and cease to be effective without further legislative action on October 1st, 2023. And so, again, as I've stated earlier, this is just for fiscal year 23, not to go beyond that. He goes on to mention, equally important, this bill does not substantively address the underlying issue of the exorbitant fuel adjustment charges that CUC arbitrarily imposes at its free will without a regulatory board or commission to sensibly institute a mechanism or qualitative and or quantitative costing and analysis periodically, so on and so forth. But, I believe we just confirmed 2 board members. I'm not sure if they will be, if the governor will be appointing additional members, but that's the first step in trying to get the commission, the CPUC, back, bring them back and start addressing the FAC rates. And so what we're basically doing is taking the projected liquid fuel tax and giving it to CUC to reduce the cost, while we still have ARPA for the next fiscal year to address the government operations. And so that was the intention of using that liquid fuel tax to ease some of the burden on the ratepayers. We also decided to include commercial customers because this would in turn have its effect on the prices of goods and commodities here in the CNMI. So not just the residential customers, but also the commercial customers, so that this will have a trickle effect on the commodities. And so I just wanted to clarify that portion of the secretary's comments. I recognize Rep. Staffler.
Thank you, Chairman. And I guess I want to echo that in that, yes, the PUC is an important element to mitigating and looking at the type of rates our people pay. And it doesn't help that there has been a lack of quorum for several years. And even with 2 people being put on the board, there's still several vacancies. And so that won't address the issue. And at least this bill attempts to do something in the interim. And so I applaud the authors for efforts, and I would like to support this bill's passage today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Staffler. Any other member? I recognize Rep. Lozama.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, colleagues. I'm going to say this in vernacular. Este na bill, maulik para tau-tau-tano. Anman na tempo deste naman meeting i PUC deste 2014. Taja trabiya ma-establish. O kataji gobyerno na managwahay si PUC committee. Dosa anolo. Tinahong ni dos, debi na kwatalotro ginin, at least ginin tau-tau tinian. Stok ba uno ginin luta, ba uno ginin saipan. Ulili mo na tisinya mafamaulik ang gintaja PUC. Pues este na biu po ni na juday publiko gi tau-tau-tano, saman mamasasapit. Pwede mon i-gobyerno nang ginmatugil na masanyas ti uap u sign into law. Sa presiso na ta adjudicatory tau-tau-tano, bula sa lapi, mapididisa ki pumalo. Malala tanol mo na sa lapi at ikitaw-tau. Sa itaw-tau pago, mamasasapit. Amju todos gini sa nizo ni maniek ngo, ingan insatsagi offer para sinya para bin na mafamaulik CUC. Manonon para Guam, bonito ni nanomami. Siyempre, I have report después de ni nanomami gato sa Guam. It is very important that you learn what we learn from Guam And I think that is possible in our island. Just want to say, Mr. Chairman, and thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Lizama. Any other members? Recognize Rep. Camacho.
My apologies, Mr. Chairman. I do have some recommendations for amendments. I don't have them on me right now. This is some small changes. I know that we have a member that a motion to adopt this bill. A motion that we table.
No, there wasn't any motion. Staff
Oh,
just
just a
recommended
recommendation.
that we take action on it today.
My apologies. I'm still trying to get a hold of the contact to get the changes. Yeah, that's
Okay, thank you, Rep. Camacho. Rep. Sablan.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I support the intent of this legislation. And I want to thank you and the authors for taking this initiative. This is meant to provide some temporary relief for ratepayers that have been really hard hit by the increases in the cost of fuel. And I appreciate that there is a sunset provision, that the next legislature could reconsider, if there is an interest in extending, if it seems to be working well, and providing the assistance as intended for ratepayers in the CNMI, then there could be some consideration to extend. But I wanted to, I guess, call our attention to the second part of CUC's comments. I do take note that they support the bill, but they do have questions that I think would warrant our attention. And I actually had similar questions about how specific section 2E on page 4, line 5, starting from line 5, how that would be implemented exactly, especially this part about CUC may allow the special account balance to accumulate prior to any offset or reduction in order to effectuate a reasonable reduction in FAC charges in excess of 5 cents per month, or at least 50% of the planned net FAC increase per month, or other reduction in the applicable base rate. And CUC requested some clarification about what that means exactly. What percentage of FAC increases will be offset? What percentage of FAC increases that are less than 5 cents will be offset by the special account? What is meant by a reasonable reduction? Is it our intention to allow CUC to also adjust the applicable base rate? There is a question about what we mean by net FAC. And we should clarify which entity is responsible for establishing the special account, and then what happens to any unspent funds once this legislation expires in October. There should be some clarification of that. So perhaps as Rep. Camacho works on his amendments to the bill, we could also address or have some amendments that would address these concerns that CUC raised to clarify that particular section, and then answer the question of what happens to any unspent funds. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. We can definitely further clarify that, but the intention was rather than just get money transferred at the end of each month, if the funds that were collected for the month doesn't really provide for any decrease in or offset any increases, then they can allow that funds to accumulate to where it would be enough to offset any increase or have a bigger effect on the reduction of FAC rates if there's no increase. But again, we can certainly clarify that. And then maybe in regards to the end of by October 1st, any balance remaining will just be applied towards trying to, if it doesn't have any effect on the FAC, then we could definitely apply it to the base rate. And so I could work with council to clarify or to make it more, to state it more clearly. But yes, the intention was to, rather than to just get money transferred every month and we don't know whether it would affect the changes in rates, they could build it up to where it could reduce the FAC rate by a penny or two, or but the 5 cent decrease, I think would be more would be felt more based on the recent rate increase that we had back in July, of I think 6 cents, was it 6 cents? Yeah, and so we can even change the 5 cents to even see what the effect of a penny or two will have on the FAC rate. But again, thank you for pointing that out, and I did. Those were some of the concerns that we wanted to clarify, but we'll make it more clear. We'll make it more clearer in the language as soon as we get the proposed amendments by Rep. Camacho. We'll also include that in the amendment. Any other member? If there are no other discussion, we will table this bill for action later on in this meeting, but not table for a future meeting. Okay, no objections? All right, thank you, members. We will now move on to item D. It was recommended by committee members to request for documents from the Secretary of Finance. As you know, based on committee meetings we've had with the secretary, as well as the budget hearing that we had from the secretary, we were supposed to receive documents but have not heard back and have not received any from the Secretary of Finance, despite several attempts to try to get those documents as well as follow-ups. And so the subpoena de system is to subpoena documents pertaining to some of the requests by the members, as well as some of the documents that were promised during the committee meetings. I know we had one in February, which was led by Vice Chair, and then we had our budget hearing, in which the secretary said he will provide with the committee some documents, but to date we have not received any. Further discussion or anyone that would like to make the motion? I recognize Rep. Camacho.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure if you already put the deuces to come together on what was requested to the Secretary of Finance, but is there a way where we can also recommend? Because I remember asking for certain information as well with regards to how much BGRT was collected from the two stimulus packages that were issued, as well as how much BGRT was collected as a result of the travel bubble or the travel bucks. I still to this day have not received that information. So if we can include that.
Are those your two requests?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for your request, Rep. Camacho. What we can maybe we will take a 5-minute recess for the to allow the members to compile a list of documents that will subpoena from the Secretary of Finance, and then we'll come back and make that motion. Short recess. Before we went on recess, we were under the discussion on item D under new business, the subpoena ducis tecum. I just want to clarify that the subpoena is a general subpoena to request for documents from any of the agencies that have come before the committee that have not provided the documents that they have stated that they'll provide after the meetings in the past. But I do know that members, there are several members that are concerned about for the most part, the ARPA expenditures. And so the subpoena ducis tecum was a general subpoena to subpoena for documents from agencies that have appeared before the committee. And so with that, I now open the floor for any discussion on item D. I recognize Rep. Sablon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of this committee's interest in carrying out its responsibilities to prepare the fiscal year 2023 budget and also exercise legislative oversight as to the financial condition of this government, and in light of the multiple requests for records that remain unanswered by the Department of Finance, I'd like to offer this motion at this time for this committee to issue a subpoena ducis tecum to the Department of Finance and the Secretary of Finance or his designee for records sought by the committee and its members to be submitted within 5 days of the date that the subpoena ducis tecum is received. And these records shall include, but not be limited to, ARPA fund status by agency, department, and expense type, FEMA reimbursements going back to Typhoon Sodelor, as well as Mankut, U2, and COVID-19, the pandemic total cost by fiscal year and expense category, the CARES Act expenditure report, the report on travel bucks, what has been spent versus what has been what the government has realized in returns, the report on attorney's fees for JGO witnesses and for Governor Torres, the report on the total amount returned from stimulus cards, as well as the projections or BGRT, a report on BGRTs collected as a result or generated as a result of the stimulus, an updated actuarial report on the settlement fund, a report on the $5 million for Medicaid that where those funds were reprogrammed from in order to meet the local match requirement for this current fiscal year. A report on monies owed to CHC that go back to fiscal year 2018, both locally sourced as well as federal funds owed to CHC, and to include ARPA money for the MRI. And I move also to allow the chair and vice chair of the committee the discretion to work with council in drafting the subpoena ducis tecum to include finalizing the list of records that we will be compelling from finance based on the input of the committee members. I so move.
Thank you, Rep. Sablon. A motion was made for the subpoena ducis tecum to the Department of Finance, the Secretary of Finance, or his designee. And it has been seconded. Discussion on the motion. And for clarification, the subpoena for these documents will be for 5 days after the receipt of the subpoena. And so if there are no discussions, can I ask the senior LA to take roll?
Rep. Denita K. Yanktemai.
Yes.
Rep. Patrick H. San Nicolas. Rep. Christina Marie Sablon.
Yes.
Rep. Leila H. C. Staffler.
Yes.
Rep. Edwin K. Probst. Rep. Richard T. Lizama. Rep. Vicente C. Camacho. Rep. Joel C. Camacho.
Hunggan.
Rep. Selena R. Babauta.
Hunggan.
Rep. Sheila J. Babauta. Vice Chair Corina L. Magofnia.
Hunggan.
Chairman Donald M. Manglonia.
Yes.
Chairman, 8 members voted in the affirmative, 2 members not present during voting, and 2 members absent.
Thank you, Claire, with 8 members voting yes. The motion hereby passes. And so the vice chair and I, along with the legal counsel, will prepare the documents that will be issued to the Department of Finance. And so that takes care of item D on the agenda. And we now move on to we move back to item A, which is the fiscal year 2023 Appropriations Act. We will be taking a recess after we go over some of the major proposals that was worked on in committee, and then we'll discuss the process that we will take after we get back from recess. And so if I can get the
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
recognize.
have we received the concurrent resolution from the Senate or?
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that, Rep. Joel. The concurrent resolution that came back from the Senate increased our available resources that will be used to appropriate roughly a little over $3 million, which was due to the July 1st budget submission, as well as the clarification on the what is owed for 2007B refunding bond payment, as well as the settlement agreement, which was initially stated that 39 million is owed, but after getting clarification, that has dropped down to 36 million. So that's where the additional 3 million increase came from. And so what the members of the committee have worked on, and what we propose is that of the 109 million, we wanted to fund and ensure that funding is provided for several activities that cannot be funded through the ARPA. That includes the roughly around 13.5 million for the 25% for the retirees pension, the 26 million for the Medicaid match. And then we also decided to fully fund the judiciary as well as the legislative branch under the general fund. We do have funds remaining to allocate into the agencies, but we also decided or are proposing that we fully fund the executive branch using the ARPA and some of the general fund monies.
Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt, but is it okay if we go into recess, short recess?
How short are you proposing? Because I was going to take a lunch recess, but just to
Okay.
briefly go, unless you want something to discuss. would you still like the short recess?
Sure.
All right, we'll take a 5-minute
you.
recess. Recess. As I've mentioned prior to going on recess, the general fund allocations, we've identified areas in which we will be using from the general fund. And just to show you a breakdown of the 109 million that's available for appropriations, we set aside the 25% to PSS. PSS board, we are funding the judiciary and the legislature using the same funding levels with fiscal year 22, which is public law 22-08. The 10 million Medicaid reimbursement is under the assumption that the matching requirement will be passed in Congress by the end of the year. And so this 10 million will be used to address the 17% local match that will be required. We are also funding the Medicaid agency and Medicaid enterprise systems, the 13.5 million in the retirees pension. If that amount, if the exact amount of 25% is less than what is being appropriated, there's a provision that we've drafted to allow for any remaining funds to be distributed amongst all the retirees and their beneficiaries in the form of a bonus. The 5 million is set aside for DPL, the health insurance for employees at 7.2, GHLI at 6.6, the NMC at 6 million, where we have the provision that the 1.25 will be used for the pro promise. And then the DC plan at 1.9, and then set aside for OPA 1%. And so what we have remaining for our allocation is 12.6 million. So we have the 12.6 million left from the general fund. We have the 32.6 million that was identified by the administration under the ARPA. And then we received a communication from the Medicaid agency yesterday that they will be returning 20 million to the government. Initially, what happened was for the current fiscal year, Medicaid, we approved the allocation of 38 million to the Medicaid agency for the reimbursements for the matching of the Medicaid, but because when the final rule came out from the Treasury that ARPA funds can't be used for any matching, this is where the Medicaid has mentioned, and maybe you've seen in the paper, that they would only be needing the 5 million from the general fund to cover any matching for the remainder of the year. And so of the 38 million that was given to Medicaid, less 18 million that was used for reimbursements on other expenses, they will be returning back 20 million from the current fiscal year. And so we have a provision, we've drafted a provision that would use that 20, because it does not expire or it does not lapse. We're going to add that 20 million onto the 32 million that has been identified for next fiscal year, for a total of 52 million from ARPA. So we have about 64 million in ARPA to address the executive branch function. However, based on the calculations from our fiscal analysts, in order to fund all executive branch employees at 100%, we would need close to 60 million. TG, can you just verify what the number is? What's that? 60,900,000. $60,931,000, and so that would leave us with approximately 40 million to allocate, or 4 million to allocate into operations. As you may have read in the news today, that there may be funds for the retirees 25% elsewhere. Those are additional funds that, because we've already identified the 25% to the retirees, those funds could very well be used to provide additional operational budget for the executive branch. as well as the governor still having his 25% reprogramming authority to allow the administration to fund executive branch functions. And so we wanted to take care of the legislative branch and the judicial branch due to our because we don't have access to those ARPA, and because the administration did not propose any ARPA funds for these branches, we wanted to take care of them in the general fund. And so what we are going to do, we will take a lunch recess, and then when we get back, we will go over some of the provisions that were proposed. We'll vote on those provisions, and then we'll identify how we can allocate the remaining 4 million of ARPA into some of the operations. I know there have been some requests made to the members in regards to certain positions that are currently being filled or are still very much needed. And so we will also discuss those inclusion because one of the main focus of the committee was to remove all vacant FTEs, whether funding was provided for those positions or they were not funded. We wanted to clean up the personnel listing and remove all vacant FTEs. I understand that April 1st was the initial submission, which had listed several FTEs, but with the revised submission of July 1st, we had hoped that any pending NOPs that are being processed or any positions that were being filled would be reflected in this revised submission. But it seems like none of that figures has changed. And so, we wanted to be fiscally responsible in removing these positions that should have been filled or haven't been filled. And if there are a need for these positions, the agencies can submit the request to the legislature to make any changes to the budget through joint resolution, as has it has always been that practice to amend the budget with FTEs through joint resolution. And so before we go on recess, I just want to open the floor to the members to get their thoughts on how some of the processes that we've taken to come to these figures. And we can address them when we get back from recess. I recognize Rep. Sablan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to comment briefly on the importance of one of the items that we will be requesting or compelling through the subpoena duces tecum, and that is the ARPA fund statuses for all the different departments and agencies, because we also saw in the media, not in any formal notification, that the reason why the governor's budget includes nothing for government operations is because the departments and agencies are expected to use their remaining ARPA balances for their operations in this upcoming fiscal year. And there really hasn't been any transparency or any sort of reporting about exactly how much is left for these departments and agencies to function. So I think that's a really, really critical piece of among the many items that we're compelling in the subpoena duces tecum. That we will need as we consider how to divvy up the 4 million that you mentioned for government operations. It would be really helpful to, for our purposes, to know what those fund statuses are, so that we can also prioritize which departments need more help in the upcoming year. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Sablan. But also to maybe include as a provision that any remaining balances within each agency under the ARPA account shall be kept within that agency, just so that they don't use it for other purposes. And just in case that we may not go through all department's request for operations, some of the remaining balances can still be used within that agency and not be reappropriated elsewhere. I know that it is a goal of the leadership, I believe, to get this budget passed before the end of the month, to allow the Senate time to review it next all of September, and give both houses ample time to address any concerns that the Senate may have with the proposed budget passed by the House. We are running short on time, and unfortunately, we had planned to get this passed by mid-July, but because of the changes in the revised budget submission, as well as the Senate concurrent resolution with the updated figures coming down to the House, and as a matter of fact, we are still waiting on reports from finance for outside source funds that we must include in the budget. And that's the Tobacco Settlement Fund, the CW fees, and the Compact Impact Funds. And those are crucial in addressing or in pointing that out, that these are funds that we are going to approve in the budget. And so absent that, we don't have a full budget to act on. But I did get word from the secretary that we will be expected to get those figures by the end of the week, so that we can include it in the budget under the outside sources. But members, we will take a lunch recess and be back at 1:30. I just wanted to give you an idea right before the recess on where we're at with the budget allocations. That way, when we get back, we can discuss the remaining portions, which is the remaining 4 million that will be allocated to the agencies for operations. And so if you have any requests from agencies, if they've reached out to you for any positions to consider, please have those ready by 1:30, and we'll start then. I understand that JGO has a scheduled meeting tomorrow at 10:30. Whatever, if we don't finish by today, we will recess until tomorrow afternoon, and then we'll see where we're at come tomorrow. But hopefully by Friday, we should have a draft ready pending the outside source notice from the Secretary of Finance. Okay, and so with that, I call for recess until 1:30 p.m. today.